So the first item on the agenda is a presentation by CNSC staff of a report on the compliance activities following the discovery of dose records not submitted to the National Dose Registry as outlined in CMD 14M5. This matter was first presented to the Commission in May 2013, and an update was provided on August 2013. So I understand that we have, I noticed that we have a representative from AECL here, but we'll start with a presentation from CNSC, and I understand that Dr. Thompson will make the presentation. Please proceed.
Merci. Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Commissioner. I'm Patty Thompson.
Protection and Assessment, and I'm also the designated officer for dosimetry services. I'm here today with Ms. Melanie Rickard, the acting director of the Radiation and Health Sciences Division, and Mr. Tristan Barr, the dosimetry services specialist, to present an update to the Commission on a previous event reported to you, as you mentioned. We are also accompanied by CNSC staff involved in the licensing assessments and compliance oversight of the AECL Chalk River licenses. We are here to update you on the issue that was initially raised in an event initial report through CMD 13M31 on May 15, 2013. Specifically, we committed to update the Commission on AECL's implementation of corrective actions associated with this early event report. CNSC staff inspected AECL's dosimetry services on November 19, 2013 to verify the implementation of the corrective actions identified by AECL. While there, another unplanned event was reported by AECL dosimetry service. Today, we would like to update you on the results of the inspection and the status of the follow-up actions that stemmed from the inspection. We also wish to inform you of the details of the second unplanned event and finally share with you the next steps regarding those issues. I will now pass the presentation to Ms. Rickard.
Good morning. To start, we'll begin with a brief overview of the regulatory requirements for the dosimetry service that have significance for the purpose of this update. AECL has an in-house dosimetry service license that supports their operating license. AECL is a complex facility, and the dosimetry service offers many methods or measurement techniques that are tailored to the hazards of the facility. Section 5 of the Radiation Protection Regulations requires that the licensee, in this case the AECL facility, ascertain dose to persons. The dosimetry service at AECL carries out this function. Section 19 of the Radiation Protection Regulations requires that doses to news that are measured by licensed dosimetry services shall be filed with the National Dose Registry. CNSC Regulatory Standard S106 Revision 1 sets out many of the technical and quality assurance requirements for dosimetry services. Finally, the dosimetry service license conditions also set out requirements that include that the licensee must report unplanned events to the CNSC. The term unplanned event is used to describe anything that can affect accuracy and reliability of the dose results generated by the dosimetry service. In this update, we will touch on the interaction between the Operational Radiation Protection Program as well as the dosimetry service program at AECL. As such, part of the organizational structure of AECL is shown on the slide. Note that the manager of the dosimetry service license and the Radiation Protection Program both report to the Director of the Radiation Protection and Environmental Protection Division. It is unusual that the person responsible for the dosimetry service license does not have direct authority over the dosimetry activities. This organizational chart reflects recent changes at AECL, but does not match the description of the organization and responsibilities for the dosimetry program that was reflected in the license application. We will be following up with AECL on this matter. Now we move into the details of the update. This slide shows a timeline of significant events. In preparation for the Chalk River Lab's annual update in February of last year, CNSC staff requested dose information from the National Dose Registry in order to compare and validate the information provided by AECL. In doing so, CNSC staff identified some discrepancies. These discrepancies were brought to the attention of AECL staff via letter on March 11, 2013. A short time later, AECL reported to the CNSC an unplanned event that involved over 1,600 doses not having been entered into the National Dose Registry, thus being non-compliant with Section 19 of the Radiation Protection Regulations. This event, which will be discussed in more detail, led CNSC staff to raise an EIR with the Commission. This EIR was presented to the Commission on May 15, 2013, via CMD 13-M31. During that meeting, staff committed to reporting back to the Commission once the corrective actions proposed were implemented by AECL, and CNSC staff had conducted an inspection to verify the implementation. On November 19th, CNSC staff carried out the inspection and discovered that the corrective actions had not been fully implemented. At the end of the inspection, AECL staff also reported another unplanned event that involved tritium measurements not being assessed for dose. CNSC staff informed the Secretariat of the Commission of this event. The remainder of this presentation will discuss the status of both events and the proposed path forward. The EIR presented to the Commission in May of 2013 involved 1,650 doses that, while assigned to workers, had not been transmitted to the NDR as required by Section 19 of the Radiation Protection Regulations. These doses span the period of 2009 to 2012. These doses had been calculated by AECL radiation protection staff because the primary means of measurement, the TLD, had either been lost or damaged, such that it could not be used. These doses were very small, in the order of 0.05 millisieverts per person. The reason for the failure to submit the doses was that the required verification step had not been completed. As a result of the event, AECL staff, in consultation with CNSC staff, proposed 3 corrective actions to be implemented by September 30th, 2013. Note that all 1,650 doses have since been submitted to the National Dose Registry. On November 19, 2013, CNSC staff went to AECL Chalk River to determine whether the corrective actions had been implemented. The corrective actions and status are summarized as follows. Corrective action number 1 was to create a deviation from procedure to allow all records to be quickly transferred to the NDR and to train staff on this procedure. A deviation from procedure is a term used in the AECL Quality Assurance Program that allows for a short-term correction to be made to a procedure without immediately changing the procedure itself. Note, however, that a deviation from procedure is a written document. While the deviation from procedure did exist and the records have indeed been transferred to the NDR, there was no evidence that staff had been trained. This was an administrative error that would have not affected the work performed, since the staff were aware of the deviation from procedure document. Corrective action number 2 was to generate a chain of custody process from manually entered doses. While the process was observed by the inspectors, there was an absence of documentation to support it. Finally, corrective action number 3 was to initiate electronic verification of manually entered doses. While the process was in place, there was no documented procedures to support the process. Additionally, CNSC staff had reviewed the proposed corrective actions, and AECL had also committed specifically to identify the follow-up actions that would be required if the verification revealed doses that had not been processed, and to identify the assignment of responsibilities for the review of the verification of these reports. These elements were not available at the time of the inspection, and there was no evidence to indicate that the verifications were being reviewed or acted upon by management. As a result of the inspection, 4 action notices were raised to address each of the deficiencies previously noted. Finally, a directive was raised to require all of these action notices to be implemented by March 31st, 2014. Note that since this presentation was finalized, AECL has submitted a response to the inspection that has addressed all 4 action notices as well as a directive. CNSC staff are reviewing the documented procedures that were submitted in order to assess whether they adequately address the deficiencies. CNSC staff will provide a written response to AECL following the completed review. Should any further actions be required, these will be communicated in the written response. Now we move to a second event that was mentioned previously today. This event was reported to the CNSC inspectors at the end of November 19th of the November 19th inspection. The event involved doses to 115 contractors who had bioassay samples analyzed for the presence of tritium, but the results of the analysis were not converted into radiation doses to those workers. The dose results were not calculated because the software program used for the calculation required an employee number. Contractors had not been assigned employee numbers. The doses per worker were very small. The maximum dose was 0.23 millisieverts, and the average was 0.08 millisieverts. Also, CNSC staff would like to correct at this time an error in the CMD that indicates 121 samples were not converted into dose. As I mentioned, the 121 actually referred to a number of contractors, not samples. Further, AECL has since determined that there were 115 contractors affected, not 121. This was information we received after the CMD was issued. As a result of the 2 events described here today, and the duration of time that these events went undetected for several years, CNSC staff are planning additional compliance enforcement activities. CNSC staff will be conducting an inspection of the dosimetry service, as well as aspects of the Operational Radiation Protection Program to evaluate the interface between the 2. In addition, CNSC staff feel that the internal auditing process, the management oversight at AECL dosimetry service should be assessed and potentially improved. While the process has identified these 2 events, these were problems that existed for some time before they were discovered, and the CNSC's questioning and inspection may have contributed to the discoveries. CNSC staff have discussed both compliance and licensing actions that can be taken to mitigate the risk of similar events in the future. Among them, a review of the licensing process in dosimetry services is underway, with a plan to use the License Condition Handbook process that has been successfully applied to the facility license. This License Condition Handbook will provide an opportunity for the licensee and CNSC staff to ensure that all license program documentation is up to date and implemented as recorded in the handbook. Additionally, we will utilize CNSC site inspectors, where possible, to conduct baseline compliance activities. This will increase the on-site presence and we believe will result in improved oversight and compliance. I will now pass the presentation over to Dr. Thompson.
To gain confidence that other licensees are not at risk of experiencing similar events, CNSC staff will be sharing information with other licensees. CNSC staff are also proposing changes to our compliance program. Oversight of the dosimetry service is a relatively young program, as requirements were first introduced formally in 2000 with the coming into force of the radiation protection regulations, as well as the supporting regulatory standard S106 Revision 1 came into force in 2006 with a phase-in period. While the compliance program and licensing changes will be considered as a consequence of these events, this update is intended to provide the follow-up information required to close the original event initial report that was reported to the Commission in May 2013. AECL has now implemented the corrective actions that were committed to when the EIR was presented. CNSC staff are reviewing the procedures that have recently been submitted in response to the action notices and directive. AECL will submit the effectiveness report at the end of April, and CNSC staff will follow up with AECL to ensure that any issues identified in the report will be addressed appropriately. This will effectively close the event initial report, and CNSC staff will continue to monitor progress on dose reporting to the National Dose Registry, compliance with any remedial actions that are required in response to the additional event involving tritium doses to contractors will be monitored through the designated officer and the compliance assurance program. This concludes our presentation on AECL's response to the unplanned event and staff's actions. We're now available to respond to your questions.
Thank you.